Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Tales of a TC. I am joined by my beautiful co-host, Ella Ray.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Happy to be here on this lovely Thursday.
Absolutely. So today we had an interesting topic. We kind of wanted to educate everybody about the chaos of closing.
Oh,
Yes. And kind of,
yes.
have you experienced everyone kind of feeling rushed at the time of closing with heightened emotions, and what do you do to prepare for that environment?
Unfortunately, yes, I always experience that. Other than making sure that all of the documents are right and the settlement statement is right and that everybody's had a chance to review everything beforehand, um, sometimes there's not really much else we can do other than just be prepared and wait for the title company to get everything sorted out, the notaries and setting that up. And sometimes they'll need attorneys as well, depending on the state. So, you just have to make sure that everybody's on the same page before we get to the closing date. And that way we can make sure that once they're there and the documents are in front of them, that they're ready to sign. But knowing that they've already reviewed them and looked at everything and they understand the numbers and they know what they're walking away with, I think that's crucial because if we don't set those expectations up front and we don't manage that up front before the close of escrow, then we can have some serious issues between the buyers and the sellers.
100%. And you and I were talking about this before we started, but in defense of title, a lot of times they're not working these files until right before close because, especially as investors, these dates tend to be super flexible and changing all the time.
Right, right. Very often do they actually, very often do they not close on the day where we're supposed to close. And some of that has to do with title, some of it has to do with the investors themselves, waiting for the last minute to form an LLC. And then the LLC docs take like 2.5 weeks and they're trying to close in a week. So not being properly prepared for closing can definitely hinder things. Miscommunications with title maybe not, maybe having too much on their plate and not being able to get us closed on time. So there's a number of reasons why title, cannot close on the day where we're supposed to close.
And especially in our space, there's a lot of times that we need attorney drafted documents, and those are outsourced when you're not working with an attorney itself. And so outsourced attorney work can they work at their own pace.
Right. They definitely do. I have one right now. It's in they're waiting for the trust to be formed and we were supposed to close today and now we had to get an extension for a week because the attorney wasn't ready with the documents. So fun times.
Yes, and I try to tell all of my parties that if we're approaching end of month or we're trying to close on a Friday, both of those are high stress situations for title. God forbid it's a Friday and the end of the month.
And
Um,
a holiday.
oh yes, holidays.
Yeah, that's like the triple whammy right there.
Yes. Um, when we're coming to closing, like November, December, pretty much Halloween on, I tell everyone the amount of flexibility that people have to have in this situation because someone goes on vacation or the office is randomly closed or anything
Right.
can happen that requires just a great amount of flexibility with that date.
Right. Or let's say it was like closing on a Friday before a holiday Monday, and we didn't sign until like 4 p.m. and they didn't wire the funds until after wire cutoff time. So now we can't even close until probably Tuesday at that point because the bank is closed and it's just there's so many different factors that can delay closings.
Yes, and I think that it's really important when you're working with your TC to have an understanding that it it feels very emotional. You're very ready to close. And sometimes I know that people get frustrated because, we have like 8 revisions of a settlement statement, or we just got these attorney documents and the percentage is wrong, or yesterday I had one where the P&I payment is wrong. And so we're going to push back on those documents. Like, you're like, oh, I'm ready to sign. And we're going to push back to make sure that everyone has everything appropriate.
Absolutely. We have to. Because at the end of the day, if those documents aren't right, it falls on us. Because, the investors are like, well, you guys didn't catch this, or the seller might have a question about it, and again, this is why it's so important for people to review those documents before we close, because we're not attorneys, right? We can only just say, okay, well, this doesn't look like it should be here if you have a due on sale clause in your mortgage and we know you're planning on wrapping this property, right? But we can't go and make those adjustments for you.
100%. And I think that the other thing that I've seen sometimes is that title or the attorney will kind of bypass us, and they'll just send documents to the notary for
Right.
everything to get signed and scheduled without even like looping anyone in or allowing anyone, even the party signing, to review documents. And
Right.
so I tell everyone at the very beginning of a transaction, it is imperative that closing documents are reviewed before they're sent to the notary.
Right. And another thing too I've noticed is that they'll send it to the notary, and the notary will perform the closing, but they'll send the documents back and not tell anybody that the sellers refused to sign like a certain page, knowing that that page was included in there for a reason. So then having to have the sellers on board, making sure that they understand, like, hey, we are going to need you to sign this, whether it's like the seller warranties or whatever it is, that we can't close without having those signed. And I actually had an instance like that where there was a document that they didn't want to sign, and the title company just kind of sent me the closing docs and was like, "Oh yeah, by the way, they didn't want to sign this." And I had to tell her, like, "Hold up, stop the presses. We cannot close this until this is signed." And it took us another day and a half before the sellers, who were in two different states and now had to get these documents notarized, before we could close with them.
I have had the same thing. I have had, especially when I first started, I had one specific transaction that title forgot the sub two documents. And so as soon as they got the documents back, they just dispersed.
Oh gosh.
And so now all of my buyers, I tell them when they wire their funds, they also send an email from them, but they send an email that says, please do not disperse my funds until we have reviewed the seller's documents. And that is so I can make sure, because title's human, right? I can make sure the sub two documents are not forgotten. I can make sure everything is signed. I keep having this situation happen on our Georgia deeds, because up at the top of the Georgia deed, it says like state, Georgia, county, whatever county,
Mhm.
not in the notary block, at the top of the deed, which is appropriate. But I
Right.
keep having notaries cross through that
Oh god.
and write their specific like state and county, and we're having to have that redone. And so like all of these things, it's just imperative that we're catching those as soon as possible, so that everyone can get paid, so that the documents are appropriate. And again, sometimes title's going so fast, they're not making sure. We had one where the notary actually did not stamp anything. She signed it but didn't stamp. Again, review documents and then you'll see everything.
Right. And also following up with title after closing to make sure that they've recorded the documents.
Yes.
That's huge too, because if those docs are not recorded, then the seller doesn't have any interest in the property, right? Like, if we're doing these mirror wraps and there's no mortgage or deed of trust recorded, the seller has no protection to go and foreclose if they need to. So, and then, if somebody else puts a lien on the property that's superior to theirs because it was filed earlier, that could be problematic as well.
It's really imperative to understand that not all title companies have the policy of recording those second lien positions. Like sometimes they get them signed and they provide them to the seller, but they don't actually record. And as you and I know, first of all, that seller is going to lose that document.
Right.
Uh, and then second of all, they're going to think that they have this enforcement when they really don't, because there's other steps they need to take. In some states, you have to pay a really high fee to record
Right.
those. And so it's like a false protection. I feel like it's a little dishonest to the seller to say we're providing this and not record it.
Right.
Um,
Especially if the buyer is paying those recording fees. Because like you said, in certain states, and I find that it's like disclosure states. So I know Florida, it's really expensive and it's based off of the price of the mortgage versus Texas, where it's just a filing fee. But that could be thousands of dollars. And if you're collecting for it and you're not recording it, then that's really on them, right? That's I mean, I guess that's something that would have to be covered in title insurance if it was something that happened like that, right?
right. And then just making sure, again, that's why we review the settlement statements before, because if we're not seeing those charges, those extra recording fees, um, you
And it's
know,
like, who's recording this?
right, right. Um, so there's so many pieces that go into the closing that I just, if I could emphasize one thing, and I'm sure like me, you tell everyone when the file starts, like, especially if this is like a shotgun closing. Like if we're trying to close in a week or two, please have the greatest amount of grace with everybody involved.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've gotten, I mean, more files than I can count that have been sent to me, and they're closing in like a week, 3 days, 2 days. I'm like, what am I supposed to do with this? So I have to scramble and everybody's rushing. And those are the times when a lot of things can, slip through the cracks. So we have to be extra vigilant during those times, especially when we have such a short time frame to do everything.
Especially with title. Title's used to having 30 plus days on traditional files to close their transactions. And so when we are then turning around and asking for quick closes,
Right.
we almost have to anticipate that there's going to be things that we're going to have to back and forth on, and that's why a lot of TCs, they charge a fee for anything that's less than 2 weeks because it adds a lot of stress to everybody's plate. And we have this really delicate situation that first I have to tell my investors, please do not call title 500 times the day before closing. Like they understand the importance of it. And like we also, our goal is to have a long-term relationship with title. And so
Right.
there are delicate ways of handling and requesting information without just like attacking title.
Right. Right. And that's something that I don't think a lot of investors understand. And it's also disheartening to some extent because if they're not reaching out to us and we're kind of like out of the loop, I mean, I was just dealing with something where the realtor on the file was sending things to the seller and the wholesaler and not including me on it. And I would get it like after it was signed. And I'm like, can you please CC me on all communications and documents that you need? So that way everybody's on the same page. And I wonder if it comes from them not having worked with a TC and just not knowing, and maybe because sub-2 transactions are so different than regular transactions.
Agreed. And I think like that's when you almost have to have your client trained to be like, what?
Right.
Has my TC seen this? I didn't see
Right.
anything on this.
Right. Right. Yeah. They absolutely should be doing that too. So I think that's important.
Yeah. Well, because we're their advocate, right? We're like on their side. And a lot of times, like I'll get a title commitment or I'll get a settlement statement and I review it and then I send it to them and then I say, hey, I reviewed it. It looks good, but please review it yourself.
Right. I'd like a third set of eyes on this, please. Thank you.
Yes. Because it's their deal at the end of the day. And like, so that's where I love when I have a new investor and they have those questions and they don't know what they're reading, like, let's make the time to go through it. Um,
Right.
because your and my goal is to make sure at the end of the day they still understand what the whole process is, It's not gonna like they're gonna stop working with us because there's too much chaos going on in the back. They know, but they should still know the documents that they're looking at.
Right. And and I think it's funny because when there's certain clients, when I start working with them, they're kind of like micromanaging, right? Because they're not used to not having to do anything. And then after we do several deals and they realize, okay, Ella's got this, like I don't need to do anything. Like I'm just here. If you have any questions, I know to ask them. But for the most part, it's something where we're pretty much you're paying us to take on all that burden. And that's what we're doing. We're fielding all the calls, all of the emails, disseminating the information the way that we need to whom it needs to be disseminated to. Because not everybody in a transaction needs to know every single thing that happens. Right. So some of that could just be extraneous information to parties in the transaction. So knowing how to discern that and knowing how to communicate through the right channels and making sure that everything keeps on moving, like that's what we're here for. So don't be afraid to just let us do our jobs.
Yes. Well, and I love that. I've been on transactions where there's other TCs and they put everybody in one email. And I have to tell you, I've seen so many sellers like freak out because they don't understand the back and forth of everybody. And so, like you said, that discernment of who needs what information, or, you know, it just it makes everything smoother when there's one central party that, you know, we're jumping on the phone with the seller, we're having these conversations,
Right.
and the client gets the update, but they need the like 5-second version while I just had a 45-minute conversation with the seller.
Or like a 10 email exchange with the seller, right? They don't need to see all those emails. Just a quick recap of like, hey, this is what's going on, this is where we are, these are next steps, or whatever the case is. But then also knowing the best way to communicate with each of the parties, right? I know for some people that I deal with, whether it's sellers or title companies or whatever the case is, it's easier for them to talk to me on the phone than for them to respond to an email. Granted, like we'll have that conversation and I'll shoot them a quick email to just say, hey, this is a quick recap of our call. But, knowing the best way to communicate and the fastest way to communicate with people is really important too, because I have people who will never pick up the phone, but they'll respond to an email in 2 minutes and vice versa. So that's key as well.
Especially sellers, a lot of them do not check their email.
Right.
So title will be like blowing them up in email. And if we don't know, and really it's a simple text like, hey, title just sent you an email. Let me know if you received it. And that's how things kind of keep moving.
Right. Not
Um,
just not just sitting there. Well, title sent them an email, so I'm just gonna wait for them to respond, and then they don't respond till like days later. And they tell you, "Oh, I never saw it. I don't check my email."
yes, all the time.
That's a recipe for stagnation right there.
Or I get sometimes title companies will send a PDF to a seller that like they don't, maybe they're not super computer savvy or anything like that. And then like I'll call them and they'll be like, I don't know how to fill this out.
Right.
Like, so then I send it through an e-signer. But those are like such small things that just keep the transaction moving and keep it easier for the investor, because those are all concerns they don't have.
Of course. And even then, like sometimes they're just not tech savvy at all. Like I've had instances where I have to print out the form and go over it on the phone with them and write in the answers because they don't know what electronic signature is, or they don't know how to use DocuSign, or they're doing everything in person. So definitely keeping that in mind and understanding a person's communication, the way that they best communicate, and what they're able to do and not able to do. Understanding that from the beginning is going to be important in moving your file forward in the best way possible.
100%. And what's really good is if we do a lot of transactions in an area that we work with the same attorney all the time. And so we actually got one of their seller information forms and
Mm.
we have it filled out when we do the purchase agreement, because if you can just get everything right, then we're not back chasing around. And so it helps. Like I find that a lot of investors don't think that far ahead, no matter how many times they've done transactions, things like that, where when they work with us and we're like, hey, if you add this, it makes everything else so easy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
And also including everything in the beginning. And I'm specifically talking about seller disclosures and sub two addendums. I can't tell you, like, receiving files from wholesalers that are sub two deals or hybrids and they don't have those addendums and those acknowledgments, it drives me nuts because I'll have to then send it to the sellers. And now the seller's like, well, what is all this stuff? Instead of if they had just received it at the very beginning with their purchase and sale agreement, they wouldn't be questioning everything, right? They would be like, okay, I understand this. But I feel like it raises alarms and red flags when they see this stuff after the fact. And I've had wholesalers tell me, "Oh no, they'll sign that at closing," and I'm just like, "No, absolutely not. They won't. We need to get this out to them now because if we don't, then I'm not gonna continue working on this file." Because the last thing you want is a seller at the closing table thinking like everything is great, maybe having a misunderstanding of what it is that they're actually even signing. And then they see this, all these disclosures and they're questioning it, like, what's going on here? I didn't know that I wasn't, going to have my mortgage cleared out or I wasn't going to, whatever the case is. So making sure to set those expectations up front and give them all the documents that they need to sign and that they understand the transaction type that they're doing is important.
100%. And it just, again, if you answer it when they're signing the purchase, or if you give it to them when they're signing the purchase agreement, you can have all of those conversations. You
Right.
can, like, talk about the due on sale, but then if you're leaving a seller to review by themselves, or like you said, after the purchase agreement, it feels sketchy.
It does. It feels really sketchy. I don't like it one bit. That does not sit well with me. And there's wholesalers who will go out there and say, "Well, I'll just use my other TC because they don't make me go through all this stuff." And I'm like, "Hey, by all means, like I don't know what to tell you, but I know like every TC operates differently. Some TCs are more careful than others. Like I'd seen, there's TCs who are giving out documents that should be drafted by attorneys. And it's kind of like, hey, that's not our lane. Like that's not what we're here to do. And I think there's a lot of liability that we leave ourselves open to when we're doing things like that.
On top of that, I had a friend of mine that got title documents from one of those title companies that do like all states, and she recorded a deed of trust in a mortgage state. Like, so,
Right.
and they had to foreclose.
Oh my gosh.
They
Yeah,
didn't
that's
even get the right documents. Like, so that's like a whole hurdle to overcome that, like, you need to have attorneys do it because they know what they're doing in that specific state. And every state has different rules. Every situation has different rules. Is this person going to be living in the home? Is this person an investor? Like, there's all kinds of different laws that protect different parties per state.
yeah. And that's why we're not lawyers.
100%.
And that's what they mean when they say practicing law, because now when the seller needs that document or the investor needs that document or whomever, and you're the TC who supplied it, then, that could be an issue. You get dragged into court. And that's why these are the kinds of things that we're going to discuss at our workshop in October. So we're not going to give you all of the sauce here, but just know that we're definitely looking out for your best interest in these transactions. So when we push back on something, it's for a good reason.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that just because you find someone else that's willing to do it or willing to forego the disclosures or wait, like, our goal is to make sure you're protected long term.
Right.
And if you're an end buyer and your wholesaler didn't get those disclosures, let's get that added to the assignment agreement, that like the seller has to sign those documents within 24 hours of the assignment EMD getting submitted or whatever. Because if you're the end buyer, you want to ensure from the very beginning that that seller is on board the whole way.
100%. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think that's it's a great thing to For wholesalers, especially when they're getting started, to know these things, right? A lot of wholesalers get started and they're like, well, what happens, what happens next? Or how do we do this? Or, and I think it's important to really just kind of have a broad overview of the process and what that looks like and the paperwork involved. You don't have to know everything about the paperwork, right? Like not everybody does, but understand like disclosures and things of that nature need to get signed upfront or before somebody submits EMD or within that 24-hour period, like you said.
Right. And so this isn't a what, right? They don't have to know the what, they just have to know the who. So they should just reach out to us because we will help them along the way.
Exactly, exactly. And that's what we're here for. So,
Yes. Well, Ella Ray, thank you so much for your time today.
absolutely. And we will let everybody know more about the workshop.
Absolutely.